Hello, you're listening to Storytelling Saga, the podcast that shares stories. I'm your host, Allie, and this week I'm discussing the first ever animated feature, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. It's interesting because obviously I remember the plot of this movie and certain key moments, but what stands out now, rewatching this, having not seen it in years and years, is the musicality of this movie. That despite the songs, like the classic songs, hi ho, it's home from work we go, and of course, someday my prince will come, those lovely, beautiful songs. Despite that, there's musicality in the dialogue, there's a lot of rhyming. There's musicality, obviously, in just the sound effects and all of the orchestral pieces throughout this movie. So that's so beautiful and lovely on its own. Despite appreciating this for what it is, for the story, the characters, the beautiful animation, the lovely artwork, and this being the first ever animated feature film, which is huge. And even at the very beginning, there's a note from Walt Disney himself thanking the team for bringing this to life and all of the hard work they put into it. And I've seen making of, behind the scenes stuff about this movie, and even, obviously, this being in 1937, how far we've come in terms of animation. That said, though, there's such a charm and beauty in the simplicity and elegance of hand-drawn animation that I severely miss with feature films now, because obviously it's not all, but the vast majority nowadays is CGI. There are some exceptions, but, it's been CGI films for the past several decades, really, at this point, that are predominant in our culture. And again, there are a few exceptions, but the last big Disney animated 2D movie, I believe, is Princess and the Frog. So obviously now it's all the CGI, and CGI of course is great too, but hopefully we can circle back to that at some point, because and obviously, even with that, it's not necessarily the same because it's not hand-drawn. Everything is more so digital because, that's just where we are with our technology and everything. But so, seeing behind the scenes of this and the people animating it, the art and the design of the characters, and then, bringing it to life with the animation sequences. Because a big one that, stands out is the scene when they're all dancing, Snow White and each of the Seven Dwarfs, and Grumpy's playing the organ, and it's really cute and adorable. But that sequence of her dancing, that's been recycled in other Disney movies. And since this is the first animated feature for Disney and for any animated movie in the US, that in the world actually, not just the US, but since this is the first one, that I noticed templates for movies that came about in subsequent years, like Pinocchio, for example, and Cinderella, with the cute, adorable critters, the woodland critters, the bunnies, the little chipmunks, the little deer. They are so cute. That turtle, oh my goodness, so adorable. And what's funny too is obviously this movie's been parodied so much in other works of animation and other stories and everything, that then it reminds me of other stuff, again, with the critters. I can't help but think of the Woodland Critter Christmas episode of South Park, which is an iconic, amazing episode. And I've talked about that episode when I discussed South Park Christmas episodes. And also I couldn't help but think of, the whole sequence when they're cleaning, which is so cute. But I couldn't help but think of the episode of The Fairly Odd Parents, season 1 episode, when Vicky's kindness dial is turned up, and then she becomes Snow White, woodland critters cleaning up the house, and then as soon as she's back to reverted back to her usual mean self, and she's just cute little animals and they're cleaning, get out. I just couldn't help but think of that. Hilarious. Oh my goodness. But but also musicality in the sequences, them washing up for supper, for example, and I said, the cleaning with the animals, and they're trying to brush the dust under the rug, and no, not under the rug, and when they're cleaning the dishes, no, in the tub, so cute. Snow White, her voice is so graceful and light and airy. And it's just such a beautiful movie. It's just like you could study it for the animation, but also for the storytelling, of course. And it's funny because I had forgotten a lot of the songs. Like, for whatever reason, I thought the Someday My Prince Will Come song was earlier on. I'm surprised it was later in the movie. I thought it was like her I Want song, but, you know, earlier on it's a different song. And it's impressive how much they were able to do with this movie, considering it was 1937. It's incredible because, for example, the part when she's looking down in the well and you see like the ripples, that effect is so beautiful and breathtaking. It's just such a lovely, beautiful movie. Snow White, again, like so graceful and kind and sweet, and just this gentleness to her, and how she just gets all of like the animals to help her out, and then how she wins over the dwarfs, especially Grumpy by the end. So cute. And gosh, the dwarfs, gotta love them. And of course, this movie, when it won an Oscar, it had the Oscar and then 7 little Oscars for the dwarfs. So that's incredible too. That's so sweet. And it's interesting because, of course, the villain is the evil queen. I had forgotten she was, I almost said Cinderella. Again, the parallels, that she is Snow White's stepmother. I did not remember that. And of course, her whole motivation, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all. And this just unlocked a memory for me now. I had a mirror, like a toy mirror, as a little kid, and you would press it and it would make those sounds from the movie and who's the fairest one of all. Oh my God, wow, that took me back for a second. Okay, anyway. But it's interesting because the queen herself is beautiful, so to speak, but because she is evil and cruel and jealous, that's what makes her ugly. Of course, like that's what makes her ugly on the inside and just wanting to take down Snow White, because Snow White is beautiful because she has her inner beauty, like despite, you know, just everything about her gracefulness, her kindness. And I had forgotten that whole thing with like wanting to, like the huntsman, like she sent out that huntsman to kill Snow White and take her heart. Like, oh my goodness. And then of course he tricked her with the pig's heart. Goodness. I was like, oh my gosh, because he had it right there. He was right in front of her and she was cowering in fear. And then he says, I can't do it. Run away. Like she's trying to kill you. Then when she runs off, and that scene as a little kid watching this movie scared the heck out of me. Like the part when she's in the forest and the limbs of the trees turn into like bony fingers. Ugh, I'm getting the creeps just recounting it now. And like all the eyes, and she just collapses in fear. And then of course the little animals help her out. And it's so adorable. And it's so sweet that of course she comes upon the cottage. And again, that I can't help but be reminded of Shrek, for example. And you know, like all things that have parodied it, like in Shrek, no, dead broad off the table. Like just things that, you know, other stuff that's parodied Snow White, you know, it's too funny. But it's just so charming and lovely. And really the story itself is just so simple, but it works because you have like all of these really fun sequences to watch, like them dancing, and then when we're introduced to the dwarfs and they're at the coal mining, so like all the sparkling diamonds, like just so visually beautiful. And then Snow White like cleaning with the animals, and then she ends up falling asleep upstairs in their beds, and she thinks of course it's all children, reading all of the names. And then when they come home and they're like, oh, something's up there, go up there, and like, you know, having Dopey go up there, and how you learn who each of the characters is just by like their appearance and the way they act and everything. I had forgotten, or I just never noticed perhaps, that Doc kind of has like a stutter and like mixes up words and stuff. That was interesting to me. Kind of vaguely reminds me of then in hindsight, Porky Pig, you know, from Looney Tunes. And Grumpy, I'm sorry, but he now, or like, I 1000% see the influence in SpongeBob of Squidward, you know, like taking that grumpy attitude. That's Squidward tentacles, you know. Squidward tortellini. Tennis balls are tentacles. Goodness, that's too funny. But I think as a little kid, I always loved Like, I loved Doc because I always liked the main, like, leader, so to speak, and happy, of course, and bashful, like, turning all red, so cute. They're all great, sneezy, and just like the bit then when they're all each holding up their finger to get him to stop from sneezing. And then, of course, Sleepy, so cute. And Dopey's just so adorable. And again, like seeing early influences, how this would then influence, like the design, influence Dumbo, for example, because like the big ears with Dopey. And even things like when they say Jiminy Cricket, I love Jiminy Cricket from Pinocchio. I haven't talked about Pinocchio yet. That's another movie I would rewatch a lot as a little kid. I actually have a little Jiminy Cricket ceramic. I'm looking at him right now because it's just a great reminder. Always let your conscience be your guide. But I digress. And obviously this Snow White is based on the Grimm's fairy tale. I'm not too familiar with the story itself. I believe, does she end up dying? I'm not sure. Obviously, like the original fairy tales of all of these movies that they're based on, they're much, much darker, of course. Like Little Mermaid, for example, she ends up dying. They're all kind of like cautionary tales. And Cinderella also, I believe, like they cut off their heels. There's like a lot of darkness and a lot of creepy stuff in those classic fairy tales, And it's fascinating because this stuff for children, but it's timeless stories that span generations. And so this too, like when they're washing up for supper, I remembered that as a kid, like as a little kid, like with the soap, and I liked that sequence. And also, of course, Prince Charming, who really just shows up at the beginning and the end. It's not much development of that character, but it's just cute at the beginning when he's singing and Snow White gets frightened, she runs off, but then she's charmed by the prince. And then, of course, she falls in love, just like that, But it's too funny, because then, of course, she's singing when they say, tell us a story. So she tells them a story about the prince and how he's so charming, and she wants to be whisked away to his castle someday. It's beautiful. And then, of course, when the queen finds out she's been tricked, and then she comes up with the whole plan to poison Snow White. And that sequence creeped me out too as a kid, like when and it's so visually beautiful though, like making that concoction and then she drinks it and it's just like, ugh, creepy. She turns into that evil, ugly witch, which like in hindsight, she could have done that to Snow White instead of just killing her, like goodness, very extreme. But again, this is the villain. That's the whole point. And also I had completely forgotten her death scene. That like she just accidentally, she's trying to move that boulder to get rid of the dwarfs and then the lightning strikes and she falls to her death. Oh, goodness. But obviously the whole thing before that with the classic poisonous red apple. Again, the imagery, it's fantastic. But the dwarfs each warned Snow White, like, be careful of the queen. Like she could show up at any point, and then it's so cute, like when she gives them each a kiss, and then even Grumpy pretending like he doesn't want a kiss, but then she gives him a kiss too. And then Dopey like puckering his lips and like running around to get another kiss. It's so adorable. And then she just like kisses them on the head. So cute. But with Snow White, when the evil queen shows up, and then like of course she has the apple, and she says, "Oh, so you're alone? The men aren't here?" And never say you're alone. That's like classic survival 101. Snow White, just nope, poor Snow White. But again, being too kind and inviting and then naive, obviously, and then like falling for the queen's trick and taking a bite of the apple. And oh, goodness. And so heart-wrenching. And that whole part when you see them saying, like, even in death, they couldn't, like, she was so beautiful that they created this coffin out of glass and gold, and they're watching over her. And then, of course, the prince shows up and gives her a kiss, and then she awakens, and it's so beautiful. So really, it is just so simple, but that's, like, the beauty of it. It's so fun to revisit. The animals are so, so cute. And then she's whisked away with her Prince Charming off to the castle, and she gives them all a kiss goodbye. So obviously, like, Grumpy came around the most because everyone else already loved her, but then Grumpy, like, it's so cute. So I think Grumpy was her favorite because she won him over, and then she's like, "Oh, why, Grumpy, you do care." So cute. Oh my gosh. What a beautiful movie, obviously. So timeless. Snow White, such a beautiful, sweet character. Gotta love the dwarfs. They're amazing. Oh my gosh. So it's so cute. I love it. And of course, the someday my prince will come. She sings so high. Like, it's so lovely. It's just such a wonderful movie. It's a classic. Obviously, you haven't checked it out in a while. It's fun to revisit. It really is. What a beautiful movie, Snow White. And with that, that's going to conclude this week's episode of Storytelling Saga. Be sure to check out storytellingsaga.com. And as always, feel free to send me any questions, comments, or writing prompts by emailing me at storytellingsaga@gmail.com. Until next time, thank you for listening, and remember, write what you love.